for Egypt, because the Nile came from the south, came from Central Africa, they all looked up to where the Nile came from. That was called Upper Egypt. And you see it's in upside down letters, but the Nile Valley has the words Upper Egypt. And when you look at the lower part, the part that spills into the Mediterranean Sea, into the Yam HaTichon, that delta shape is called Lower Egypt. And what's important is that these two lands were actually two different countries with two different pharaohs, with two different kinds of crowns. And this is what they looked like. The first one, the crown of Upper Egypt, you can see on the map, it kind of is a tall, white, conical hat because it's upper, it's high. And yet in Lower Egypt, there was this red crown, which is called the red crown of Lower Egypt. Now, I'm going to put these together to explain something, but if you see that the crown that Paro is currently wearing on the right, you see he's holding a staff and he has Anch, the power of life, in his hand. That is called a menace, and the nemes, and that is the crown of Lower Egypt. Now, there's a special crown you would wear if you would be able to unite Upper and Lower Egypt, and that is called the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Can you see that? Now, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt is what gives Paro the power who controls all of the Nile. So the pharaoh, the first pharaoh in all of Egyptian history, is the pharaoh who united Upper and Lower Egypt to become one powerful country. And that is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. And this concept of upper and lower is going to relate to their mythology of the gods who rule the upper world and the world of the dead, called the underworld. So the pharaoh is like the god who rules both worlds and both lands, and that's very important for the Egyptians. And we are going to see that soon. So now that we've had a taste of the understanding of Paro as the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, we're going to be able to go and visit some mummies. Ignore this for now. I'm switching screens. We're going back into the museum and we're going to visit the land of the dead. All right, let's move out. You can look at some more of these paintings because there's a lot of fun to do with them. You can see a lot about what they did with the Nile, how they lived along the Nile, right? Let me see if I can get some more wine press. Okay, fine. It's not the same paintings that we have today. Now we're going to visit, we're walking through a period of time, which is when the Greeks were in Egypt. This is when the Torah was translated into Greek. This display currently is not in the museum anymore. If you look at the very bottom, this was captured in August 2010. That's 10 years ago. Things have changed a little bit in the museum, but this is still here. And we're going to take a closer look at this. All of this papyrus, that's the name of the plant that they make this book from, this paper from. The word paper comes from papyrus. This papyrus is called the Book of the Dead. And the Book of the Dead shows us how much the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, which is their idea of Olam Haba, of the world to come. Or for them, it's not the world to come, it's the world that's below. And if you are a righteous person, a tzaddik, you get to live in the kingdom of Osiris in the underworld forever. And in order to do that, you need to pass a series of tests. And we're going to go into depth into that and see how that helps us understand some of the makot. So no rush, we're going to get back to the Book of the Dead. But I want to introduce you to this one mummy who I have a family connection to, and it's worth telling the story. And I'm not kidding, I really do have a family connection to this mummy right over here. His name is Nesmin. Now, Nesmin is a Greek Egyptian, so he was probably a Greek who lives in Egypt and was mummified like all the Egyptians. And on the sides of him, you see the sarcophagus, the wooden cases that he was inside. And we're going to soon see a lot more of that. Now, how is this mummy important to us? So King Tut, everybody knows the famous King Tut that Carter found. And he's so famous because they found all the treasures that weren't stolen by tomb robbers, which they usually are stolen. So we found him. He became famous because of that. And they opened up the mummy to see what the mummy looks like inside. And you see the skin and it's dried out and icky and scary. But that damages the skin because when you open up the wrappings, the linens that wrap the mummy, the skin gets exposed to the oxygen and then it gets ruined. And the whole point of wrapping it and protecting it in so many layers is that that doesn't happen. So we're going to talk about why. But the way this mummy was studied, this mummy was actually opened up digitally without ever really opening it up. It was put through an MRI, it was scanned, and then in the computer you can remove the linens and look deeper in and look at the skin and reconstruct the face. And you can look even deeper in and look at the bone structure. And you can try to figure out how the bones survived. Was the person killed by something? Did they brush their teeth well? Was he stabbed in the back with a knife? Is there any carving of arrows in the bones? Was he killed in battle? We can really know this stuff. And the way we know this stuff without opening them is through using MRI, through using radiology. And my cousin, Dr. Hoffman, was on the team of NYU radiologists who scanned Nesman, and that's my family connection to this mummy. So that was a fun story. And we're going to go a little more into depth into mummies to talk about why they mummified and how is that important to us. So let's move further in. Let's look around a little bit, look at where we are. There's some guards walking around early in the morning. Yeah, we're going to get back to some of these places. I don't want to get sucked into this room, and sometimes on Google Street View, you get sucked into another room. Let's see, is Anubis here? No, a lot of this has changed. Wow, a lot of this has changed. We're going to try to go into this room, but I just want to show you this sarcophagus. This big stone sarcophagus has, well, not anymore, but it had a couple inside. It had a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, and this is because they were buried together, mummified together so that they can together fight over the blanket. So that's the point of putting them together there. It's kind of it's a kind of a romantic mummy. Okay, we're gonna go inside to this room, and this whole room is all about mummies. So let's move up close. Okay, I'm gonna try to get a side view. All right, take a look at this. A little bit to the side, okay. So what you're looking at now, imagine if you could sort of open up the mummy and have all the different layers floating. That's kind of what's happening. They're suspended in midair. You familiar with the Russian Matryoshka dolls, where there's a doll inside a doll inside a doll? That's how the mummies were done. You'd have the mummy all the way inside, and it would be covered by a wooden case, sometimes by several wooden cases. And if the person had enough money, they'd also be covered with a stone case, like a sarcophagus, like the one we saw outside. And we're going to see more of them. Now, the reason that they did this is because the Egyptians believed that if the body is preserved forever, the soul can keep on visiting the body. And the soul needs the body in order to stay, right? Which is very different than what we believe in Torah, in Jewish thought, where we bury the body, it decomposes, and there's a neshama. It's a different concept. For the Egyptians, in order for the soul to last, you have to preserve the body. And that's why they developed these techniques of preserving the body inside another case so that it lasts forever. And I want to show you how that played to their advantage. So here's more examples. Here's a case where there was a mummy inside a case, inside another case. So this person wasn't so rich, right? But let's see a few other ones. And here you see an example of where the outer case, the sarcophagus, was actually burned. It's charred by fire, which means that the inside was protected because it had so many layers. So they got lucky, right? Even though these things are buried underground, I don't even know how it caught fire, but that happened. And so it was still saved. And the mummy is right down over there. The light is a little too bright in this Google Street View. I wish they would redo it, but you can't really go into the Met right now. I actually asked them if they would do it. But this is the mummy. I actually laid down next to it. She's like 5'2", something like that. That was the average height back then. So there's more and more of these. So we're going to go through the mummies. Look at, I want to show you a pet. They mummified a pet. Wait a minute, I just went through a wall. There we go. They even mummified a little pet, like a little gazelle over there. They mummified different animals, sometimes because they were pets, and sometimes because they gave divine protection, like they mummified crocodiles, and they did a lot of weird stuff. So that's one of them. Okay. I see there's a question. Oh my gosh, No, toilet paper was too expensive. Linens were cheaper. Oh my gosh. All right. Here is another Book of the Dead. Now bear with me, because this Book of the Dead, actually, I'm going to show it to you in higher resolution, the same one right there. This picture, I'm going to now go a little bit more into depth so that we can analyze that and understand what's going on. And in order to do that, I'm going to introduce to you some of the happy characters that show up in the Book of the Dead so we can really put together the different pieces. And hopefully we'll be able to also understand some of the makot, that the plagues that happen in Egypt, because this mythology is going to help us appreciate what Hashem is trying to achieve. So let's take a look. First of all, the god of the underworld, of the world of the dead, is called Osiris. And you can see that he's mummified because he's in the dead, and he's also green because he's dead. And he's the one who you have to sort of appease. And so the person who died has to go through this judgment, which is explained in the Book of the Dead. It's called the Judgment of Osiris. And we're going to look at the papyrus in just a bit. Now, the person who, the Egyptian god who looks over the process of this judgment of Osiris is the god Anubis, who's the god of the dead. He's not the god of the underworld, he's the god of the dead, which is not the same thing for the Egyptians. Now, this is important to us, specifically in terms of the plague, the Makkah, which has to do with death, which is, of course, Makat Bechorot, the plague of the death of the firstborn. And during the death of the firstborn, we have a very interesting thing that happens. We have Hashem telling us, or telling Paro, that not a single dog will snarl at any of the Israelites, man or beast, while there's dead everywhere in Egypt, while there's death in every house. And the purpose of the dogs being completely silent is this is in order that the Egyptians will know that it is the God of Israel, it is Hashem who makes the distinction between Egypt and Israel. In other words, who will live and who will die. Whoever's a Galaxy S8, if you can just make sure you're on mute, it keeps on popping up. Thank you. Now, this is important to us because when Hashem sends Moshe to Egypt to take us out of Egypt, the mission is to go to Paro and to really help Paro change his perspective so that he realizes that he's doing the wrong thing in subjugating us and making us slaves. And that's not an easy thing to do when Paro thinks that he's like a god, right? So how do you prove to him that he's wrong instead of just like bullying him into sending us out? He needs to understand something about the world, right? So that's kind of the whole story. But what I want to focus on just in this one is that when Hashem sends Moshe, he says, "B'chol Elohei Mitzrayim e'eseh shvatim," that I will judge all of the gods of Egypt. So you can ask, what's the purpose of judging the gods of Egypt? Who cares? They're not real gods. But the point is that for the Egyptians, they are real. And the Egyptians, that's how they look at the world. You can't just say like, okay, we're just gonna, we're gonna teach you a new reality. You have to build it up. It's like a 10-step therapy sessions for them to gradually realize who really runs the world. And in the plague of death, they realize that it is Anubis has no control over death, because dogs would be howling, which is kind of a sign of power control, like we're in charge, we're celebrating, there's death everywhere. These wild dogs, these jackals love it. And if the dogs are completely silent, it's a miracle. And that is teaching the Egyptians that Anubis, the jackal, the god of the dead, has no connection to what is going on. So that was kind of an important thing for us to see. I see there was a question. Let me see.
So look, he's telling you all about all the different Egyptian gods are.
How did Yaakov and Yosef allow themselves to be mummified? Oh, delayed question. Well, I don't know. That's a good question about why they would allow them to be mummified. It says, "Vayachantu arofim et Yisrael," and even that Israel, Yaakov, was mummified, and even talks about how many days it took, which is quite accurate. It was 40 or 70 days. I don't remember. But I don't know. That's a good question. In terms of Jewish tradition and what kind of burial we allow, that is a very good question. I don't feel I'm prepared to answer that question, but it's a very good one. So thank you. I should definitely look into that. Before we're there in the judgment, we're almost at the judgment of Osiris. We have two more characters to meet. They have this one and the next one. Now this one is Ma'at, or Me'at, who's the god or goddess of balance and cosmic order. And you see how she's looking like a god. She's standing with the staff in one hand and the ankh in the other hand. All the Egyptian gods are pictured pretty much the same, except what's different is what their head looks like. So her head has a feather. Now that feather is very, very important to us. And here's the reason. This is an ostrich's feather, which is a very big feather. And balancing an ostrich feather on the tip is impossible, right? And the whole point of it is, this is the symbol of cosmic order and balance. In other words, the idea of balance in the universe, where everything is just and balanced and perfect, is the ability to balance a huge feather on its tip. So this is the goddess who has to do with order over chaos. And this is very, very important to us because this is an example, a picture of her. And that's because Paro's role in the universe, according to the Egyptians, is to rule the Nile, right? It's to provide order and balance to the universe. And that means life. Like the Paro, the Pharaoh's job in the world is to make sure that there's balance, that there's life, that people have what to eat, and everybody pretty much. Yaakov, are you saying something, Yaakov? Hello.
Yeah.
Zoom meeting. I like guys.
People keep on popping in and not being on mute. Where was I? So Paro's job in the universe was to maintain Ma'at, to maintain her in cosmic balance, and that means that Paro sees himself as the one responsible for the success of Egypt and the world, right? He really thinks this about himself. This is going to be very important in a moment. Okay, one last thing I want to point out is this monster who's called Amot, or Amot the Devourer. You see, he's kind of like Anubis's pet. And here's the cool thing about Amot, and we're going to see him in a moment in the Book of the Dead, in the Judgment of Osiris. Amot is a combination of the three biggest human-eating or human-killing animals in all of Egypt. You can tell the face is a crocodile. Yaakov Fritzler, are you speaking or are you just unmuted?
I'm here. I'm joining. I'm going to mute and then I'm going to join.
Thank you so much. And the front part of the body is a lion, and the back, the hindquarters are a hippo. Now, believe it or not, hippopotamuses or hippopotami are lethal animals that can chase down a human and snap them in half. They're very dangerous animals, especially if you get near the mother who has her cubs or her babies. So these three human-eating animals combined together is like the Egyptian boogie monster, and that's going to play an important role in the Book of the Dead, which we're going to see. But the reason I'm bringing this up now is because the question is, what is the plague of Arov, which is wild beasts, right? What is Arov? So there's two ways you can read it, and Rashi brings in that.
Come,
plague,
we're going to watch inside.
So JJ, what? Hello.
There's a tour of the Met Museum. I got the historical artifacts here. Go something like.
Okay, a word from our sponsor. So the Arov can either be, thank you, can either be a horde of wild animals that are coming together, or as my friend Rafi Zeram has explained, it could also be in Erbuvia, in Arov, an animal which is a monster, which is a mixture of other animals, kind of like the Egyptian boogie monster. Okay, so let's move on. So now I'm going to take you into that papyrus that we're standing in front of in that room with all the mummies. And this is the picture right there. This is from the Judgment of Osiris, and it is called, it's called the Weighing of the Heart, okay? Okay, and so let's just put the pieces together, okay? We have Osiris sitting there on the right-hand side on his throne because he's the king of the underworld, right? He's ruling the dead, and you kind of need to, to please him in order to make your way in. And in order to get there, there's a lot of different things you have to do. There's beasts you have to, and demons that you have to speak to, okay? Hang on one second. Okay, and this papyrus happens to belong to this woman. You can see that woman shows up all over the place. She's all over the top. She's there on the left, on the bottom. This is a Book of the Dead that was written for her mummy, so that if her body is preserved as a mummy, she can revisit the body and then read the book and then remember what she has to do in this very, very long process of the Judgment of Osiris. And one of the most important parts of the Judgment of Osiris is this ceremony, which is called the Weighing of the Heart. The Weighing of the Heart. Now, in the Weighing of the Heart, there's Anubis, because he's the god of death, and he's the one who's responsible for the transition from life to death. So he's going to be the one there on the scale. On the left-hand side of the scale, you have the heart of this woman who is inside a jar, because otherwise it'll slip and fall and it's gooey and slippery, right? They put it in a jar, right? It's symbolic. And on the right-hand side, you have Ma'at. And remember that Ma'at is the goddess of cosmic order and balance. So in order to be righteous, your heart needs to be light in comparison with Ma'at, with cosmic order and balance. And if your heart is too heavy, then this monster is going to eat it up. And we're going to see that in just a moment. But what I wanted to point out just here is that if Paro's role in the universe, according to the Egyptians, is to maintain ma'at, is to maintain order and balance, he is the ultimate tzaddik. He is the good guy, right? Imagine what it took for him. It took 7 makot. This happens at the end of Makat Barad, of hailstones, where he comes to Moshe and Aaron and he says to them, the source is on the top, Chatati hapam, this time I have sinned, I am guilty. Hashem hatzaddik, va'ani ve'ami areshayim. God is righteous and me and my people are wrong. That took a lot in order for him to get there. His world has to be unraveled slowly so that he can realize that he's not the big hot stuff that he thinks he is. He doesn't rule the Nile. He doesn't rule the land. He doesn't rule the animals. He doesn't rule the heavens. It's not in his control. And he gradually comes to this appreciation, even though it takes him a long time until he really comes through the 10 steps therapy session. Okay, so let's take a look at, this is another picture of the Book of the Dead from another part of the museum. And you see the same thing. You see Anubis at the scale. There's a feather on one side and the heart in a jar on the other. And look in the back, behind Anubis is Amut, the monster. And if the heart is too heavy, the monster will eat it up and the person will never be able to go into the kingdom of Osiris. And so for a person's heart to be heavy, that's the same thing in ancient Egypt as saying evil. That's very important. Because when Hashem sends Moshe to Paro, he says, Ani echbadeti et libo ve'et levavadav. I have made his heart heavy. Hardened literally is from kaved, from heavy, for his heart and his people. And the point is that in Egyptian language, when you say a person's heart is heavy, that means they are evil. This is a kind of language that you would understand in ancient Egypt. Okay, so we have seen this. Now we're going to go back into the museum, and I see we have some questions. I'm just taking us back into the street view and let's see the questions. Okay, where is the monster? The monster was right there. I'm happy to show them to you again. Let me move back to that picture. Here, all the way on the right. All the way on the right-hand side is Amut, the monster. You see is the hippo. This one actually has him as a leopard. It's usually a lion and a crocodile. So this is one of the most popular papyruses in ancient Egypt. There's a lot of versions of this. Okay, you see it? Just want to make sure you see it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Awesome, Joe. Gotcha. And I keep on thinking it's Jack because of the name. Gotcha, Joe. All right, so now let's move on into the museum. So we've kind of gotten a glimpse of the underworld, and we're going to be going in now to see some other stuff. Let's go in. Okay. Let's go out. And right now I'm going to take you to really one of the coolest. Oh, this is cool. So first of all, this stela, I want you to see how tall it is looking up. It's a very tall piece. This is a piece that belonged to Ramses II or Ramses the Great. Now, despite what they might tell you in the 10 Commandments, Ceci B. DeMille, that Ramses the Great is the Paro of Egypt, it's very possible, I'm not saying 100%, that the real Paro of Egypt was actually 200 years earlier. It's a complicated discussion, but it has to do with what was going on in Israel and Canaan at the same time that he was king. It doesn't really add up. So whatever, it's a broader conversation. It also has to do with how long the time of the Shoftim, the judges, was. If he was the king, then the time of the Shoftim is scrunched into half the time it's supposed to be. It's a long conversation. There's some new carbon dating that just came out now, which is changing the game. It's too early to talk about it. But in any event, Ramses the Great was a very important king. He was one of the greatest kings of ancient Egypt, and this is one of his monuments. And here's a cool thing about Ramses the Great. Many Egyptian monuments were recarved by kings who wanted to erase the memory of the previous kings, and they would just carve on top of it. But Ramses said, you're not doing this to me. And so he carved so deep into this granite that it just wasn't worth the trouble for the next following king to do it, and it remained. And you see how deep it's carved in, all of it. You see the dress, you see the conical hat of Upper Egypt, right? This is Pharaoh Ramses the Great. And here is another Book of the Dead. Let's see if you can zoom in on it. You can't see it, but this one's in color. It's kind of cool. Okay, another sarcophagus, another crown. This crown is called the Blue Crown, which is the crown we saw in the painting in that hallway. But anyway, I don't want to overwhelm you with all that stuff. There's too much going on here. Let's walk through this ghost woman, and boom, we are in one of the coolest parts of the Met. This is called the Temple of Dendur, which is a temple from a place in southern Egypt, south of the Aswan Dam, called Dendur, and it's basically in Sudan. Okay, so let's move in. This is from 2010, mind you. There's some things that have changed. Look at all these seated Sekhmet, the goddess of war, the lioness. She has the ankh in her hand. All the gods in Egypt have that little ankh in their hand. That's a fun story. Anyway, oh, this is in the dark. That's a room of mummies. I'm not going to go there now. Okay. Well, if we were in the museum right now over here, there would be a granite statue of a crocodile in the Nile, and we're not going to talk about it because it's not here. But this is replicating the same scene that the Temple of Dendur had. It was sitting on the banks of the Nile. And it's a really, really important story, which has to do with Egyptian history. So in the 1960s, that is 60 years ago, the Egyptian government decided to build a dam to collect the water, to control the Nile way up in Upper Egypt, which we would call down south. And everything south or above the Aswan Dam flooded. The waterbed just rose and rose and rose. And so many Egyptian monuments which were built there were covered in water and flooded. And this is one of them. And it was covered by water, and it was rescued by a UNESCO team. And the story is all over these plaques that tell you the whole story. And you just won't be able to see it too well right now. And as an appreciation for America's involvement, the Egyptian government gave it as a gift to the United States with a condition that it be in a public place. So look at this logic, which I'm telling you, it has to be a Jewish mind behind it. Look, it's in Central Park. It literally is in Central Park, but there's this glass window, which means you can't get into it. So it's in Central Park, but you have to go through the museum to get into it. So it's still, it's kosher. It must have been a Jewish mind who came up with that. It's like a Talmudic mind, but it's inside Central Park. Now, this temple was actually built for a Roman emperor who was called Augustus, Emperor Augustus or Octavian. And that's really cool because that means that this Egyptian temple is a fake. By a fake, I mean it's not an authentic Egyptian worship, it's Roman worship. It's the Romans telling the Egyptians, I want you to show you are loyal to the Roman Empire by doing what you do as Egyptians, but do it for me. And there's a picture here on the side where you see a pharaoh right here. It's with an offering table in front of some of the Egyptian gods. And this pharaoh is it's hard to see him here, is actually Emperor Augustus, who looked nothing like this. But propaganda. So this is the Temple of Dendur. And it's the only temple, Egyptian temple outside of Egypt. And you never get to have such a clear view of it. There's always tons and tons of people waiting to get in. Okay, so that was fun. Let's move along. Let's see if there's any questions, please. Now we're going to be walking through the museum a bit. It's a good time to ask questions. You can just unmute yourselves and ask. Okay. Here we go. Lighting is much better. There is a scribe.
What were the temples used for? Did they have some sort of worship that they did over there, or what was the purpose?
Very good. The temples, they served God, so there would be some kind of God in there, and you bring them libations and offerings and so on, and that God would offer protection to whatever that region was. Except there must have been some sort of statue of Augustus as a god or something like that, in order to sort of treat him as a pharaoh god, so to speak. So they're doing what they would do for an Egyptian god for the pharaoh. But they generally would bring offerings, and gods were very local. There would be a patron god of different cities or regions of Egypt. Wow.
Was the Paro a god also?
The Paro was sort of like an intermediate between human and God. Paro had a birth name as a human name, but he also had a god name, a Horus name. Not exactly a Horus name, but he was basically, when he dies, he would basically become Horus, who in Egyptian mythology is like the avenger who was killed. And then to give you an example, it's like the Lion King, where Simba runs away after Scar, his uncle, kills his father Mufasa. He thinks that he's also dead, but then he comes back and avenges and regains the kingdom. So in Egyptian mythology, Horus is the child whose father was killed by Uncle Set. And that's Osiris, who becomes the god of the underworld because he was killed and resurrected. But since he was already killed, then he's the god of the dead. And Horus, the avenger, avenges his uncle and then rules the underworld and the upper world. So he's the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. He's like, so that every pharaoh was also called Horus. And before the pharaohs were called Paro, they were actually called Horus because of this mythology. So the Paro was sort of like, he would become a god when he dies, but he's like a half god when he's alive. Okay? Now, a fun thing about this basket, I'm sure you can guess where this is going. You can kind of fit a baby into this basket, but that's not what this basket was for. But what's cool about this basket is it's from the right period of time, more or less from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is why people love to get pictures in front of this basket. But this basket was used for storing food. Okay? Let's take a look at some other stuff. Okay. Now, we've spoken about pharaohs, and we've spoken about the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, and I'm going to put that together. But I'd like you to meet one of the first of 5 queens in Egypt who assumed the role of pharaoh. This is Queen Hatshepsut, who was the queen regent because her nephew, Thutmoses III, who was a great conqueror who also conquered Megiddo in Canaan. He was a powerful conqueror. He was too young to rule the throne at the time, and his father died. So his aunt, Hatshepsut, was the regent, but she didn't like the idea of being a regent because it's kind of like you're not really that great and people aren't going to respect you. There's a lot of stigmas against women rulers. So she said, you are going to call me your king and your pharaoh. And she called herself Pharaoh Hatshepsut, or in English, Hatshepsut. And this is the many monuments that she made since she was a very successful queen, pharaoh for 15 years governing Egypt. And she has many statues erected in her name. And what's really cool about them is that you see that they have a beard, that she was a queen. If you look up close, it's really hard to see right here, but there's straps on the side because it was a ceremonial beard that they would wear. They wouldn't really have beards. Egyptians would really shave their heads because of lice. They would just wear wigs on ceremony. So they were all bald, pretty much. But here's the cool thing. This is the crown of Lower Egypt. And here we have a crown of Upper Egypt. Let's move up close. Wait a minute. Here we go. And all the way at the end here is the crown of the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. It's a little hard to see it, but you can see that it's kind of flat and then there's a round part that protrudes upward. So that means that she was a ruler in all parts of Egypt. She was a powerful pharaoh, very important in Egyptian history. All right. Here's a sphinx, by the way. This isn't the big sphinx. It's the small sphinx of Senwar Set or something like that. One of the pharaohs from the time of Avraham Avinu. In any event, a lot of cool stuff to see here. Let's see if you can get a close-up at this cosmetic set. No promises. Okay, yeah, you can't really tell, but there's some cosmetics there and lots of jewelry. It's really cool. Okay, so we're almost done. We have a couple more stops. In this stop, I just want us to appreciate the magnitude of this construction, which is very small in comparison to other famous monuments like the temples in Karnak and Abu Simbel and so on. But it still gives you the sense of the colossal structures which the pharaohs built to glorify their names, just how everything was massive and made you feel really, really, really small and insignificant. Kind of like those people bowing down to Paro at the bottom of that picture, which we saw at the beginning. So it's really important to recognize that the Egyptian construction, their architecture was built to make the regular person feel small and to make the Paro, the pharaoh, be above all. And see, for example, the vulture up here, this bird, it's a little hard to see it because of the lighting, but that is the god Horus, and he's wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, because Horus is the ruler of upper and lower worlds, just like the pharaoh was the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. So they really saw the two as connected. Their mythology is really important for understanding their rulers. Now, our last stop, I might have to do one of my tricks because you can't walk through here because of how the Google Earth did their thing. The Google, whatever you call it, Street View. I'm gonna try to jump rooms. Okay, let's see if this works. Here's a sarcophagus with lots of paintings that are no longer there today. Okay. We're gonna try to get through here. All right, I think this worked. Did it work? Yes, here we are. Okay, here we are. So this room is a really fascinating room. I'm going to show you close-ups with high-resolution pictures from the Met's website, so you'll know everything we're looking at. But this is one of the most amazing rooms in the Met to me because it shows you what was found in a tomb that wasn't looted, that wasn't robbed by tomb robbers. And it was found by accident exactly 100 years ago by the Met when they were excavating in a place in Thebes, which is called the Valley of the Kings. And that's because there were many kings whose tombs were in that valley, and they were protected and guarded because of the treasures that were buried there. But at a certain point, people, thousands of years passed by. People just, people stole the stuff. Now, when the Met was there excavating, they discovered by accident a hidden door, which the robbers missed, and had all these little models, boats, and little square rectangle wooden boxes that have scenes from daily life inside them. I'm going to really show them to you up close in a moment. But what's really important to know is that these are original wood and paint and linen and strings from Egypt from 4,000 years ago, from the time of the ancient pyramids. This is really fascinating that it survived and that it lasted because the Egyptians wanted everything to last. So here's some examples of Egyptian boats, and we're going to look at this up close. And every single one of these boats has the governor who was in charge of this estate, or ruler, whatever he was, and his name was Meket Re. Re is the sun god, Ra, or Re, or Amun Ra. And so that was his name, Meket Re. Now let's take a closer look at these images and explore a little bit about them and see how they help us understand Pesach better. So here we are, miniature models from the tomb of Meket Re. From left to right, you have a stable with cows, and there's a whole lot of pieces in the middle that I couldn't fit them all in the picture. In the middle, there's people making bread and beer, and on the right, there's one of those boats. Now, I'm taking you here specifically because I want to explore the concept of bread and chametz and matzah, which we are prohibited from eating chametz and seor and Pesach, but we need to eat matzah. And I want to show you that when we understand this and we understand the Nile, it's all going to suddenly make sense. The mitzvah, the commandment to eat matzah and stay away from chametz, and seor, from leaven and stuff that ferments and rises, and how that helps us be free people. So let's take a look. We're going to look at some psukim, we're going to look at some verses. Remember that when we left Egypt, everyone was complaining because Jews love complaining, right? So when we go to the desert, we start complaining. Things were great in Egypt. Beshiftenu al sir habasar. We sat on the flesh pots. There was plenty of meat to eat, and indeed we had plenty of meat to eat. Beochlenu lechem lasova. We had plenty of food. We were satiated. We had enough to eat. And now you took us out to this desert, us and all the congregation, to die. I'm like, come on, like things were good in Egypt. This is kind of a crazy thing to say. Let's just give a bit of a very dark comparison. Let's say, God forbid, right? Somebody who survived the camps in Auschwitz. And he says, things were good in Auschwitz. We had free bread. I mean, really? You had free bread? You didn't have a life. They took everything from you, and the bread was free. It sort of came along with it. So we were in Egypt, we were slaves, and the bread and the meat was free. I mean, really? Like, what are we complaining about? So we need to understand what this was. It's very, very important. So let's take a closer look. So this is a closer zoom in onto those little miniature models. You can see the paint that's on the wood, and even how they have there's women standing there on grindstones, on rechaim, and the even atochenet, the grindstone, and the grinding of grain, of wheat or of barley, had to be done every single day if you want to have fresh bread. Remember, there's no refrigerators, right? So since people would grind every single day to make their bread, that expression, the daily grind, actually meant your daily work for your food. So there's these women on grindstones, and there's a man sitting there with, he's kneading dough and rolling dough. You see his hands are covered in flour. They're white, right? And then there's a person standing there heating up an oven so that they can bake the dough. Now you notice that when we left Mitzrayim, and this is already in the desert, this is in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, we started complaining that we didn't have any meat to eat. And we said, we remember in Pasuk Hey, in verse 5, Zacharnu tadaga shenochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. You remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free, and then the leeks and the cucumbers and all that stuff, and the onions and the garlic and the watermelon. And this was chinam, it was free. And you just think, like, how could you possibly call this free? I mean, would the people in Auschwitz, God forbid, call the food free just because it was given to them without being charged? And it's a crazy concept when you think about it. but this is really at the core of freedom. Because remember that the Nile in Egypt is always flowing. It's an ever-present reality. It's just there in Egypt. And so you don't really have to think about it. And when you live off the Nile, you really don't have to think about things. Things are just given to you. Now let's take that a step further. Egypt had a very important invention. They came up with the pyramids, but they actually invented something which made them the most powerful economy in the ancient world, and that is bread. Egypt invented bread. In other words, the economic power of Egypt of producing so much bread became possible because they had the Nile. They had the surplus. The Nile just gave them so much that they were able to produce obscene amounts of grain, and they even used grain as currency. If they wanted to measure the GDP of Egypt, it was how much grain did they produce. So that's very important. Now, what is it about Egypt inventing bread? Well, here's the thing. Egypt were settled along the Nile. You're not traveling anywhere. But if you're living anywhere else in the world, people were pretty much nomadic. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, right? Our forefathers were nomads. We had herds and we moved along the mountains following the seasonal changes to go where it's better for grazing. Like, we moved all the time. Movement means you can't have a portable oven to make bread. You're not waiting for your dough to rise. That's not a smart thing to do if you're traveling. But if you're not going anywhere, let it rise. Let's put it in the oven. Let's bake it. And so bread and leaven, chametz and se'or, are Egypt food, are Nile food, which is Egypt's invention and contribution to the world. And yet matzah is the typical nomadic food. It's what everybody ate because everybody traveled. So this is a very important thing, and we're going to put this together. So here's people, that's also from one of those miniature models. They are making beer. So there's a person pouring beer. They're kind of working with the grain. The one thing we are told we need to stay away from on Pesach is Egypt food. It's Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. You need to eat matzah, right, which is the bread of traveling food. But you need to remove Bayom HaRishon Tashbitu Se'or Mibatechem Ki Kol Ochel Chametz V'Nichreta Nefesh Ha'im Yisrael. So for 7 days you need to remove all the leaven from your house, and that includes bread and beer, which are pretty much the staple food of ancient Egypt. And in fact, studies have showed that the farmers, the Egyptian farmers who built the great pyramids of Giza, actually were paid by bread and beer. So you can get men to do a lot of stuff for beer. Not much has changed since then. And so bread and beer as the staple foods of Egypt are the foods you need to stay away from if you want to be free. That's such an amazing idea. And so to put it all together, when you are I'm going to quote you from H.E. Jacobs, who wrote a book called 6,000 Years of Bread. It's Holy and Unholy History. And in 6,000 Years of Bread, it's a fascinating book. He was a baker in the American Army in World War II. And it was, I just have the 70th anniversary book, fascinating stuff. And the first 2 chapters of the book are about Egypt and the invention of bread, and the Jewish calendar based on Chametz and Matzah and Nisan as the first month. Those are his opening, the first two chapters in the world history of bread. So the important thing that he points out is that the Aron HaBrit, the Ark of the Covenant, has the 2 rods, the badim, which are placed inside it to carry it in travel. And just like the menorah and the shulchan, like all the other vessels had to have these rods so that you can carry them and transport them in the desert. But even when we rest and the Bet HaMikdash is built and the Aron is put in its final resting place in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, in the Holy of Holies, there is a negative commandment, a mitzvat lo ta'aseh, not to remove the rods, the carrying rods from the Aron. Why? And here's where H.E. Jacobs was able to pick up on a midrash and put it together beautifully, because Torah is movement, is life. And so it's constantly needs to be, Torah is in motion. Even if the Torah it's there in the Bet HaMikdash, it needs to be on travel mode, because freedom is movement. And yet Egypt's bread is slavery. It's that dependence on the Nile. It's that dependence on Paro, who rules the Nile. It's Paro who takes the credit for everything you do, so you are never free, because it's Paro who blessed the Nile, so you should say thank you for letting him give you the ability to grow this grain. Right? You can't get out of it. And so bread and beer are foods of slavery because they ferment. And if you think about matzah, it's movement, it's action, it's 18 minutes, you got to go, you got to move, you can't let the thing rise. And so matzah is freedom food, it's movement food. It's a fascinating, fascinating insight. So before we're done, and then I'm going to stop so we can maybe have some questions. I want to take you to take you to one more picture, and this is really where we're done. And this is a picture from Karnak. This is one of the massive monuments of Ramses the Great. And you can see people, really, really tiny people standing there in the doorway. You have to imagine how small you feel approaching this. And this is really, in a nutshell, this is ancient Egypt. This is the kingdom which tries to make you feel like nothing. And Paro rules everything. He is literally and metaphorically at the top of the pyramid, and he takes all the credit. And so leaving Egypt is to kind of understand a society which makes you feel like nothing, like you don't have your own freedom. And because of the very geography of the land, because of the nature of the Nile and all the religion and the kingship and the society which is built around it, the concept of freedom was non-existent in ancient Egypt. The person was always a slave to Paro. If Paro says, throw all the babies into the Nile, no questions asked, because Paro is a god, right? They couldn't think for themselves. And the whole concept of leaving Egypt and being free and eating freedom food is to be free people with our own individuality and our own free choice. And that is why God says, I've broken the yokes of your slavery, and I have so that you can walk up high with with your chin held high, with your head held high, and be really free people. So this is kind of, in a nutshell, a little bit of the experience of ancient Egypt, which hopefully we can appreciate and apply to our lives. And I want to thank you for your time. And now we can take questions. Oh, wow, a lot of participants. Oh, my God.
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome. All right. Joe, how are we doing?
Okay, great. I have a question.
Sure.
It's Joe.
Yeah.
I kind of, I don't know if we rushed through, or I missed a little bit of the part with the monster and its multiple animals in one.
Sure.
Can you just show us that again for a minute?
Absolutely. Let me take you to there. Okay.
Yeah, I know it was connected to the Arov, and Rashi mentioned something, and I don't know if I just missed it or if everyone, my computer was a little glitchy.
It's possible I rushed through it. I hope not, but let me take you back there. We're going to go back to Amot. Okay. So first of all, here we are. So this is just a fan art that I found, but this is the Rashi, which talks about what was the Arov. He says it's all kinds of dangerous animals which have come together in an irvuvia, which is the same source, the same root of the word arov, which means mixture, ta'arovet, irbuv. And so he's saying it's all kinds of wild animals coming together. But it is possible to argue, and again, we don't really know, but this is this is an insight I learned from my friend Rafi Zero, who said that it's possible to read it this way, that it is an arov, the animal itself is a mixture, it's a composite of different animals, and Egyptian mythology has such an example, which is the boogie monster. It's the terrifying monster of Egyptian mythology. And this particular monster plays a critical role in the Book of the Dead. You can see him here. In the other version, he's just farther off. He didn't fit in the picture. So he's always there in the judgment of Osiris. And that's why I brought him up. You see?
So it's like a joke that Hashem was playing on the Egyptians, putting the kind of possibly one of the places, the Arov, being that monster that kind of terrorized them in real life.
Or
yeah, pretty much. It's the boogie monster. Yeah, it's your nightmare. That would be really cool.
Why after?
Maybe the actual stories came from the Makkah of Arov, and now they're saying, oh, that monster of the Makkah, that's their boogie monster.
She's saying that maybe the hieroglyphics or the mythology came because of the Makkah, and then they started writing.
The thing is that they show up much earlier. Like they're much more ancient. So that would be a nice thing, but we don't, apparently our Yetziat Mitzrayim happened after these Book of the Dead, these mythologies existed.
Okay, I understand.
Another question, in terms of the actual archaeology of the whole story. I know I've seen different articles, I don't know if they're real or not, about soldiers being found in the sea.
That was such a hoax. that some of the sites that put it up, like whatever Israeli like Kiruv sites, they took it down, which is very rare. It was a hoax. Yeah. In terms of Egyptian archaeology, the truth is
No, I never found the chariot.
no, we never found those chariots. The truth is that there is very little or no solid ground to stand on to say we have proof of the presence of the Hebrews in Egypt and the Exodus. There's many things that we find that show us that the Torah's description is a very genuine description of what Egypt was like on many levels. The fact that we haven't found evidence can be two different things. Number one, the question is, are we looking in the right period of time? And as I mentioned earlier, it's very possible that we're even 200 years off in terms of where we're looking. Second, the question is, what would you expect to find, right? Because there was no ancient ruler would want to commemorate their failures, right? And we know that even from Egyptian history with the Battle of Kadesh, where they fought against the Hittites, and they basically left it at a draw with a covenant, but each one pretended that they won, or they really upplayed their victories and downplayed their losses. So you can't really trust them. The question is, what would be written? Who would write it? Why would it be written? So there's a lot of questions out there, and hopefully we'll find out more. But the Torah's description of ancient Egypt is accurate in many, many different ways, which really gives us insight into Egyptian mythology and the background and so on.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, any other questions?
Anybody? No charge.
Well, I hope to do more of these on Chol HaMoed, and there's also the Israel Museum and the British Museum and the Boston Museum. So museums I've been to, and they have good street views. So I'm going to try to see what I can put together. So, keep in touch and we'll see what happens.
Nachi,
Okay?
Nachi,
Yes.
hey, it's Joe Sabag. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Good.
Happy holiday to you. And thanks very much for putting this together. This is really, really fabulous. If you're going to do in the future, a couple of things. If you're going to do this in the future, different museums, maybe give us a little bit more heads up. Like I just saw this 2 minutes ago. Maybe you sent it out. Maybe
Yeah, it was very last minute. Yeah.
Okay. To the extent that you can, that would be great. And is there a recording on this? I saw somebody wrote a text.
Yeah, so the recording was saved. I'm going to ask Joe to send me the link. It take like after he closes the recording, it's going to send him a link, and I'm going to have the information. I am waiting a little bit because again, this is my parnasah, so I'm doing these throughout Pesach, but I'm going to upload it to my YouTube channel, Torah Intermedia, a little bit later. But if you contact me privately, I'm happy to send you the information.
So just to be honest, up front before everything, I recorded it, but my internet was a little glitchy and it shut off. It shows on my phone that it was still recording. I hope we got the recording.
Okay.
Let's see what happens after this, but I'll send it to Nachi after.
If not, there will be more and they'll be better. And hopefully the next time around, the part about the monster will be clear. So it's all good. It's all good.
Perfect. Any other questions?
Thank you. It was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nachi.
Of course.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Hag Sameach. Besorot Tovot.